trying to reassure each other and the world. America's top diplomat and China's leader were sitting down for talks earlier today, potentially crucial step towards mending these US-China relations. The two global powers have been at odds, and that's, to put it mildly, over a host of issues that have sent relations, frankly, plunging to a new low. Antony Blinken, the first US Secretary of State to visit Beijing in 5 years. Have a listen.
Here in Beijing, I had an important conversation with President Xi Jinping, and I had candid, substantive, and constructive discussions with my counterparts, Director Wang Yi and State Councilor Qin Gang. I appreciate the hospitality extended by our hosts. In every meeting, I stress that direct engagement and sustained communication at senior levels is the best way to responsibly manage our differences and ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And I heard the same from my Chinese counterparts. We both agree on the need to stabilize our relationship.
Well, for his part, President Xi says there are reasons to be hopeful. Have a listen.
The Chinese side has made our position clear, and the two sides have agreed to follow through the common understandings President Biden and I had reached in Bali. The two sides have also made progress and reached agreement on some specific issues. This is very good.
Well, key points of contention between the two global superpowers are Taiwan, spying, and the war in Ukraine. And don't forget US restrictions on the sale of semiconductor chips. CNN's US security correspondent, Kylie Atwood, has been reporting from Beijing. And here's what she told my colleagues a little bit earlier.
One of the things that the Secretary of State set out here in Beijing to accomplish was reestablishing, setting up military-to-military channels of communication, essentially lines of communication that could be used in the case of a crisis between the two countries. That's given the fact that there have been two recent military incidents between the U.S. and China just in recent weeks in the South China Sea, in the air, and by the sea as well. But that is not an area where he's headed back to Washington with a victory. He said that the Chinese didn't agree to set up those channels. Listen to what he told me earlier today at the press conference.
This is also something that I raised repeatedly during this trip. I think it's absolutely vital that we have these kind of communications, military to military. That imperative, I think, was only underscored by recent incidents that we saw in the air and on the seas. At this moment, China has not agreed to move forward with that. I think that's an issue that we have to keep working on. It is very important that we restore those channels.
Now, we also know one of the issues that you mentioned out of the gates there was Taiwan. One of the readouts from a meeting that the Secretary had here made clear that Chinese officials made demands when it comes to Taiwan. They said that is the area that presents the most pronounced risk to U.S.-China relations. The Secretary of State said at the press conference that he made clear that the U.S. has concerns about China's provocative actions when it comes to Taiwan. And the United States doesn't right now support Taiwan's independence, but they don't support either side taking unilateral actions that could upend the status quo currently. Now, there was progress, forward movement on another topic, and that's an issue of synthetic opioids, which of course is a major killer of Americans back home. Fentanyl, the precursor chemicals for fentanyl, largely come from China. Secretary of State said that the two sides agreed to stand up a working level meeting on this, a group that can actually address this issue to stem that flow of those chemicals into the United States. And on Ukraine, they also addressed the war in Ukraine. The Secretary said that Chinese officials once again said that they are not going to be sending lethal aid to Russia to be used in that war, but they're still watching Chinese companies incredibly closely.
Well, that was CNN's Kylie Atwood reporting from Beijing. I want to bring in my colleague Anna Coren live from Hong Kong. Anna, I think what we are hearing out of Beijing today is absolutely fascinating. just pick apart what we know at this point and why it is potentially so significant.
Well, certainly on the issue of trade. I mean, these are two countries, Becky, that, you know, the largest economies in the world, the top two trading partners. Almost $700 billion worth of trade goes between the United States and China. And we know that China, you know, it needs the United States. Its post-COVID recovery has not been as strong as it had hoped. We know that youth unemployment is soaring there. The property market is incredibly sluggish. And China needs its US export market to flourish. You know, the US makes up 16% of Chinese exports. So that is why this is so important. It is hoped that from this visit, this two-day visit, which we didn't know if Blinken was going to meet with Xi, you know, that came at the very last minute, obviously off the back of 10 hours worth of cumulative meetings with the foreign ministry and then China's top diplomat today. But you know, because of that, Blinken met with Xi. Now, Becky, a short time ago, we heard from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They held a briefing with reporters in Beijing after Blinken departed for London. It was Yang Tao. He's the Director General of the Ministry's North American Oceanian Affairs Department, and he said that this visit by Blinken marks new beginnings in bilateral relations, which obviously is very conciliatory, it's very hopeful, it's very positive language coming out of Beijing. He did, however, say, Becky, that he rejects Washington's strategy of de-risking from China, and that is something that we heard from Antony Blinken. He went on to say that if US simply repackaging decoupling as de-risking from China, the policy is turning away from stability and opportunity. It won't solve US problems. It will cause more problems globally. Now, obviously, Becky, the hope is that, you know, communication lines have been re-established. That was always the aim. And that from this, the Treasury Secretary from the United States, the Commerce Secretary from the United States will now come to visit Beijing in the coming weeks. Becky.
Let's just be quite clear about the definition of de-risking. Thank you, Anna, because I think it's important here. And you will hear a lot of countries talking about de-risking at the moment. What it means is and here's a strict definition of this, the phenomenon of financial institutions, countries terminating or restricting business relationships with clients or categories of clients to avoid rather than manage risk. It tends to be used within the context of financial institutions, and that's where you would hear it. If you're across your business news, you'd have heard the term de-risking in the past. It's so interesting to see global leaders using the term. We heard it used at G7 of late. We've heard it used once again by the Americans here in Beijing. It is a term that you should become more familiar with.